Now let's look at the render room. The render room, while it's not necessarily the most capable renderer, you'll find that there are some limitations to it in 3D Coat. It's definitely good enough for most people to get at least a fix on what your model is going to look like as far as after it's been painted and textured and whatnot. Now, what we're looking at here is just a voxel, and the reason I did this is so I could show you that you don't have to use the render room at the very end of the process. You can use it at any point in the process. So this is basically a representation of my model on the screen with some real-time render lighting going on. If I uncheck this, you'll see that, yeah, we still have lighting being processed realistically. I don't say realistically, but real time. If I were to change the angle of the lighting, I could change it, and you could see that change occurring. But it's not the same as real-time render, which basically shows what it would look like if we were to save the render out. And so this is computer dependent in the sense of how realistic it looks in terms of, it's hard to explain. It's just more, it'll process faster, the faster or better computer you have. So in this case, I might want to have a higher quality render using 32-bit rendering, and it'll process an infinite number of rays of light. As I move this around, you'll see them process again. And if I keep waiting, it'll flicker, 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 and eventually it'll get at least a little bit more steady. If I uncheck that, the render lighting goes up to 320 rays of light, and then eventually it'll stop. And so I can get some better lighting depending on which one I want to choose, and I may or may not see a difference. Same thing with anti-aliasing. If it's on, you'll get a smoother edge versus if you have it off, but if with it on, it increases the amount of computational power required. Lightness is the lightness of the scene. AO percentage is the ambient occlusion or ambient lighting in the scene. You can even have depth of field and choose the plane position of the depth of field. Now above this, we have the screen size, which in this case I've chosen custom size. So you can choose the size of the image that will be generated inside this gray box, and that's something to think about. So where my model has gone over that gray box, it should, I believe, cut that off. So even if it doesn't, you can tweak it to your liking. You can also choose preset custom sizes based on certain screen settings. And so I can go to some incredibly ridiculous size image here, assuming that my computer can process it. And that's really going to matter, and you're really going to see the difference in terms of the speed of this if you do the render animation. Rendering animation basically is a turntable. So while we're dealing with the different settings here, if we want to set up our image in path and name, we want to go down to where it says render result, left click, and type in our name and pick our image type. And if we do the show image sequence folder, if we click on that, it will basically pull up another prompt where we can name a folder where our render sequences are going to go for our turntable if we want to render one. We can also choose lossless images, make sure we don't overwrite images, image files, and change like the rotation of our turntable if we wanted to do that as well. So a lot of different settings here. You can even say, let's say I turn off real-time render. If I choose no shadows, of course, it's going to allow me to move this around and tweak it a little faster than if I had shadows. But I can turn it back on. In my case, it doesn't matter. But again, it's machine dependent. If you had a retopo mesh for your model, you could click on this and it'll take what you had retopoed in the retopo room and put it smack dab into the render room. But it's not to be confused with the wireframe. This is the retopo mesh. So whatever colors were appearing in your retopo mesh in the retopo room are going to show up in the render room. If you wanted to show your wireframe, you could literally just press the 4 key. And if you had topology on this, which in my case I don't because I'm in the voxel, this was a voxel. But if I wanted to show the wireframe, I would just press 4 and it would show a wireframe over the model. Now, it's sort of limited in the sense that the wireframe just goes in at whatever width and color it is, so it's not often very useful in that respect. And when I say the color it is, that color can be changed if you go up to Edit, Preferences, Theme, and then change your wireframe color, but it's not going to change the thickness. So it's only going to show up but so well. As far as lighting in the scene, again, you can adjust the ambient lighting and the intensity of your primary light up here, but you cannot change the angle of your light. You actually have to do that down here on the right-hand side under options. And so if I go to my lights, I would change, say, the angle of my light this way. And the same thing for any additional lights you have. So if you want to add a light, just click on Add Light, and it will add an additional light. If you want to change the color, click on Color, and change the color. And so if I go to real-time render, you can see that that light has been added, and I can change the rotation angle of that light. If I'm having problems seeing an update in the screen, just click on the viewport somewhere outside of your model, and you'll see it change. And again, I can change the light height, can change the light scattering, the light intensity. There's different things that you can do, but for the most part, that's about it as far as tweaking the lighting. I'm actually going to delete that one. So that way you can see me remove a light from the scene. When I'm ready to render, once everything has been set up the way I want, I can press render, and it will show, it will render out that actual file where you saved it. Render animation will create a turntable effect. And then you also have this frames to render. So you can dictate how many frames you want it to render and how many rays or light rays per frame. So of course, this all affects how fast it goes in terms of rendering out the sequence and what it looks like. And at this part, it says render subsequence. So render subset of frames. It is useful if you want to re-render only some small part of a sequence. So if we check that, we should be able to pull out like a section of the sequence, I would think. I actually expected it to show me a prompt here. I don't ever use this setting. So what I expected it to do is give me a check mark and say, I want frames 100 through 150. And it didn't seem to do that. So that's a little odd, but that's something that can be improved upon. So that basically is the render room. I guess the only other thing I can tell you is that you can get like camera settings if you want to show the front, the back, whatever. And so if you're finding it doing this ghosting thing, just click on the screen, or you can just turn off real-time render, and it should adjust the screen to meet your needs. So while that says back, if I clicked on back, you notice it shows the side, and that's only because the way I sculpted this on the axial layout is it's not rotated correctly, and that's okay. I can change that later on. So that's the render room. Hopefully you have learned some things and realized that it does have some limitations, but it's still a somewhat capable renderer, and we'll look forward to the next video.